about the history of the Association of Media Literacy, how it came about, and kind of cultural influences that.
Right. We started in, really, you might say, the 1960s, because even though the group started officially in 1978, there had been activity in the 1960s, and understandably so, because all the social ferment, the technological revolution, the advent of TV on a mass scale was really 1960s. And so the social ferment, the technological things, they all came together. And so teachers in the more liberal 1960s, it was understandable that they would look at that world, that mediated world. So the first movement was a late 60s thing, about 1967 to about maybe 1970, 71. And then the back to the basics movement in education came, the pendulum started to swing back, and as a result, these things went underground. They didn't disappear. So some of the media teachers who were doing it then and kept doing it through the 70s, we brought them together. So Linda Schuyler, the producer of Degrassi High, Arlene Moscovich and the National Film Board, the three of us got together, had an invitational conference for 40 teachers whom we had identified by consultants and coordinators, and a very successful thing for a whole day. And out of that, we decided to have a major conference, major in those days meaning 60 people, so at Ryerson Polytechnical, we had the first conference.
What year was that?
1978. So, starting with that very modest number of about 60 people, we experienced slow growth right up till 1990, where we have 1,200 members.
The role of the association, one of the things that it does is to give this kind of seminar to train teachers, recruit teachers to do media literacy. How did it move from being that sort of ad hoc group into an institutionalized, almost institutionalized group we talk about?
Yeah, I guess when you can say we're institutionalized, it's when we were being taken seriously. Like when the institution comes to you and says, we need to write a media literacy resource guide. I guess that's when we were institutionalized. You might even say co-opted. But the only way we were going to change is if we work through those traditional structures, the Ministry of Education, school boards, teacher federations. So the climate started to change in the mid-'80s when I think there was even a greater need to have media literacy than in 1978 or even 1968. There were outcries about the proliferation of pornography, violence. The VCR had arrived, the Sony Walkman. So those technical things combined with the social concerns as addressed by various community groups meant that there were more lobby groups that were on our, working on our behalf. And all we did was to coalesce those various groups. And then when the ministry was revising the guidelines for English, they said we should address the media. And then they said, who's going to do this? Well, naturally, the Media Literacy Association, and that's how it all came about.
I was talking to Robin Quinn and Barry McCann earlier, and they said that one of the success stories, well, Australia's been a success story in terms of media literacy. One of the reasons why they could do that is because of the centralization of their educational system. They usually do have a good idea, and it gets quickly implemented.
Right.
How does it work here in Canada and Ontario? What kind of struggles do you have to go through? And where do you foresee any kind of difficulties in the future as well to get media literacy implemented on a broader basis, even nationally?
Right. Well, of course, in Ontario, everything is based on school boards, and there's something like 70 large school boards. There's more in the total picture, but there are approximately 70 large school boards in Ontario. And the way the ministry works, of course, is that they have curriculum that is then to be implemented at the school board level. And of course there is an administrative staff and often a consultative staff to do that. So we are not centralized to nearly the same extent. In other words, school boards have a fair amount of autonomy, but they still have to follow these broad guidelines that are laid down by the ministry. clearly what has to happen in other provinces is to have the same sequence of events take place as happened in Ontario, where there was a lobby going on. It really boils down to lobbies. It boils down to having a critical mass. And when that takes place, and if you can get alliances with teacher groups, subject groups, teacher federations, community groups, that we all want this. This is part of democratic citizenship in the 1980s and 90s. Then a ministry will move, and if they're revising their guidelines, what you do is you say you've got to have this as part of the curriculum. And that's starting to happen. It's starting to happen in Quebec. At this conference, we've had representatives from Quebec who are starting chapters of the Association of Media Literacy. It's starting to happen in Alberta. We've had conversations with people in British Columbia. Saskatchewan, we have Mick Ellis, who came here. He has already got something in place. So it's not necessarily exploding elsewhere, but just as it didn't explode in Ontario, it took us 8 years before we got the credibility and the critical mass to make the difference. I think it's not going to take as long in those other places to get something significant, but they're not going to suddenly do it in 1 year. It's going to take time. But the fact is the groundwork has been laid.
Okay, one of the concerns was that media literacy is located in English departments.
Right.
How can you expand that so you have a kind of a literacy program that isn't located in any particular place, but it's a program on its own, if possible, that could draw on all the different disciplines?
Yeah, so it's really a cross-curricular application, or cross-curricular applications of media literacy. Clearly, English is not the only place to have it. And I think most people realize that. We know that by the very nature of talking about the media, that it's interdisciplinary. What we have to do, though, is, because we're primarily English teachers, for better or for worse, is we have to encourage other subject areas to see that it's relevant to them. And frankly, in some areas, while they should be doing it, they don't have the kind of mindset, the receptivity to the idea. I mean, a few of them do, but whether they can turn it around, I don't know. Ideally, it should be across the curriculum, just as language is across the curriculum. So it's really, really hard to know. And, you know, even in English, they can still have one of their credits can be a total media credit. And the art teacher can do the same thing, but very few of them do.
What's the curriculum breakdown in media literacy? Every student that enters high school?
Grades 7 and 8, it's 10% of language arts. In the intermediate division, that's 9 and 10, 30% of one course. And in the senior division, 11 and 12, it's 30% of one of the senior courses.
And, okay, so we have that. And then you have sessions here. The Media Literacy Association essentially gives sessions for teachers to retool themselves.
Right.
What have you. How many sessions does the average English teacher, for example, get in order to go back into the classroom and then teach media literacy?
They might get an hour and a half on a PD day. They might have a couple of evenings. So the average teacher, I would say, has probably had about a day. And maybe, I don't know, some meetings with the department, etc. How are we going to do this? What do you think of the resource guide? And what do you think of this new text? There'll be a few conversations. And some of those teachers may have had a course at university, might have even had one of your courses.
Well, that's the next step, is how do you go about changing the curriculum at the university level, teachers college level, where you try to sort of make sure that educators and teachers do this.
Well, that's right. You see, that's the thing, that they're often lagging behind. This is a grassroots movement. That's what makes it so exciting. This was not imposed from on high. These were the practicing teachers who could see the impact of the media on young people. And they're the ones that set the agenda. What's unfortunate is often the people who teach in the faculties of ed have been there for 25 years. They weren't doing it in the first wave of media education. They're sure as hell not going to do it now. And some of them are doing it, but they're doing it in such a token way which means 1 or 2 classes at the most, or they're doing it in a model that we think is largely discredited, that's called the inoculation model. If you learn great aesthetics, you will have great taste, and you will come to hate popular culture and save the world from masterpiece theater.
Great. Now let's focus our attention on this conference. This is how many conferences are these?
Well, this is about our 4th. This is the first North American one. It's the first 3-day conference, and it is the biggest conference, you know, in media education, probably in North America.
I was impressed by what I saw here in terms of the focus of a lot of the sessions. They were very practical, very hands-on. And I just want to get your assessment, or overall assessment of this conference.
Right. Well, we have had, you know, lots of praises lavished on us, and of course we're sort of on a high, and we're probably, when we sit down and look at the individual evaluations, people will often say, yes, but, you know, and that's very important to hear. Clearly, as a generalization, it has been a great success. And I think if you had a straw vote, if people were being sincere and putting up their hands, you'd probably get 90% saying an outstanding conference. I mean, that's my sense of it. Then they would say, well, out of the, I mean, they had 3 workshops Thursday and Friday, so that's 6 workshops, and 1 today. So that's 7 workshops. Out of that 7, if they got 2 to 3 that were dynamite, that can be absolutely transformative. And if the other ones were so-so, or 1 or 2 that just didn't click, that's not too bad. In many conferences, you're lucky to get 3 out of 7 that you'd say are dynamite. And my sense is, whether it's Judy Posner, Varda Burstein, Susan Cole, Derek DeKirchhoff, whatever, that those workshops were really well received. And then the plenary sessions, and above all the fellowship, you know, the fact that we had an American sitting down beside an Australian, beside a person from the Philippines, BC, beside Nova Scotia and Quebec, meant that there was a real fellowship. And, you know, after Friday night partying, I mean, a lot of people knew each other, and they really had some common concerns, and a lot of things to celebrate.
Basically, I think that we'll probably do we interview you and we interview Ken.
Right.
And we went over some of the similar questions.
Sure.
The idea in my mind was just use these as sort of
Yep.
narrative.
Right.
And have them show the whole thing. So if you have anything else you want to add to this?
No, I guess the big challenge is going to be sustain the energy. You see, these are high energy experiences. And the problem often people say is, can you take that, where is it going to be in 2 weeks' time when those mundane things start to wear you down, like the principal, how come I can't get the VCR, you know, I just haven't got time to prepare lessons. So that's what we have to do, is conferences are clearinghouses of information, they're peak experiences, but it's how we going to focus that's going to make the difference. So interview us in a year's time, and we'll give you the other side.
Well, the other thing that I was going to mention is just my personal observation is that the teachers themselves, if you were participating here, from very, very background and different levels of awareness in terms of they really sound very competent, some are new and perhaps were a bit discouraged at the level
All right.
that was there, but others just simply came to it very first thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's really important for us, that we get different levels of expertise, because then we learn from that. The experts want to go to the next stage. They want to do the complex analysis. The other person just wants to know what to do in day 1, and that's equally as important.